Hi, I'm Rachel Wojo, and you're listening to the Caretaker's Journey podcast.
Welcome to another meaningful conversation. I'm your host, Carol Leatham. As I thought about this episode today, I was remembering sitting in an empty house the morning after I left my husband in a psychiatric lockdown facility. It was early in the morning, I was alone, I hadn't slept, I was worn out, and I found myself crying out to God into an empty room. And I was saying things like, God, do you see what's going on? How am I going to get through this? What am I supposed to do now? I was desperate. I was wanting God to answer, and he did, but it wasn't necessarily the way I wanted it to happen. So I'm confident that there is a listener out there right now who is resonating and feeling like I did, even right now as they're listening to me talk. You're asking the same questions. You're waiting for God to answer. You might be desperate. My guest today is Rachel Wojo, and she has written such a special book called Desperate Prayers, Embracing the Power of Prayer in Life's Darkest Moments. She is an inspirational author, a speaker, a podcaster. Rachel's biblical approach and her personal life experiences empower women, and I love this, to discover our strength and hope in everyday situations. Despite enduring the loss of her father, her mother, and an adult child who had special needs, Rachel remains resilient. And guys, I'm going to tell you, she is. And you should follow her. Go look for the show notes for the social media and her website. You need to follow her. She is deeply in love with her husband, Matt, and cherishes being a mother to her 6 children on earth and 2 that live in heaven. Rachel, welcome to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
Well, I know that there are listeners out there who are asking these questions. Does God really hear? Does prayer really work? And one of the things I realized when I started opening your book and just kind of thumbing through it before I really dove into it, your book and your words are going to resonate with so many of the hurting people who have cried out to God only to feel like they haven't been heard. And I think every one of us has been in a situation where we've needed to hear from God and we're not hearing it. So the first thing that I noticed when I actually started the deep dive into your book is that each part of the chapter titles includes a 3-word prayer. God fill me, God show me, God free me. So let's start off talking about how can a simple 3-word prayer have such a powerful impact in our lives?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I believe that one of the issues that most of us have when we're walking through hard spaces and difficulties is our lack of focus, our inability to think
Yeah.
clearly. When I lost my daughter, when I experienced
Mm.
miscarriage, when I lost my mother, my father, all of those things happened to me. I didn't realize the fog that would set in and cause me not to be able to think. And so I think the effectiveness of 3-word prayers is that it simplifies the
Mm.
process of praying, and we have a focus. And I believe the power in those 3-word prayers is not in the words at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in us at all. The power of those prayers is just our yielding to God. So
Oh, I
when we
love that.
say, God, fill me, or
Yeah.
God, show me, we're
Yeah.
saying, you are God and I am not. And I need your supernatural power beyond myself, or
Yeah.
I am not going to be able to function or make it or process these
Mm-hmm.
things that are happening to me on earth. So I hope that's helpful in
Oh, yeah.
regards to
Oh, I
just
know.
choosing.
I love that because I think what happens is when we get into that desperate circumstance, we are losing our focus. And those simple
Mhm.
3 words, what I discovered when I started looking through each chapter and reading each 3-word prayer, what I think it does is it helps us step into the presence of God. God's still there, but we're more aware of it. And
Yes, that's a good
when we're
way.
speaking those 3 words, we're opening our heart up and saying, okay, God, I'm paying attention. and it's hard because when we get desperate, it gets scary. And I know that one of the other things that I found in your book, and I loved this, I love what we're about to talk about. You share how your prayers for your daughter Taylor, and I want you to share just a little bit when you answer this question about Taylor and her circumstances, but you shared this thought. Your prayers changed, or they shifted from finding a cure to finding courage. And as a caretaker, oh my gosh, this has been such an important shift in my own life, because I think we want to find cures. We want to find solutions. So share with us a little bit about Taylor, and then why, and especially how you made that mental shift, because it was a difficult one for me.
Right. I think it's difficult for all of us who are giving care or taking care of loved ones, whether they're children or whether they're aging parents or a spouse who is disabled. Regardless of the specific circumstances, I think
Mm-hmm.
all of us struggle with really knowing how to ask God for both a cure and courage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think mine shifted from a cure to courage because in our situation, there was no cure. There was no
Oh,
treatment. My daughter Taylor was diagnosed with a rare metabolic disorder at the age of 4.
oh.
And this disorder left her with neurological degeneration. The process of the disease is gradually losing every skill by skill. It's often called a childhood Alzheimer's. And
Mm,
so, because there was no cure and there was
mm.
no treatment, at first I was angry with God,
Yeah.
as all of us usually are. The frustration of emotion sets in, but I did take those emotions to him. And I
Mhm.
do think that that is one of the things that I, quote unquote, did right,
Yeah, yeah.
because I took those situations to him. And so I'm so grateful that I did, because he's big enough to handle our emotions,
Oh,
right? He
absolutely, absolutely.
created those emotions. And so
Mhm,
he's big enough to handle them. And I really believe that that shift happened, moving
mm,
from asking for a cure to asking for courage
mhm,
happens because the more time we spend in God's presence, the more we gain his perspective.
mm.
And so when I started to see what God was doing and how he was working, and I started to get glimpses of his plan for our
Yeah.
lives, then I was like, okay, Lord, I'm in this with you, but I cannot do it without you.
Oh, oh. And I think when we start, for me, when I start praying for a cure, I care for my husband who struggles with mental health issues, for my mom who has 2 terminal issues, not 1, but 2. and 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 when we focus on praying for the cure, it's hard because with my mom there is no cure, like just like
Mm,
with your daughter Taylor.
mhm.
But I almost feel irresponsible when I'm not praying for healing or praying for a cure. And then I forget that I need the stamina. I need to the encouragement. I need to pay attention to what God's trying to do. And I, like you, have even in my anger gone to God and said, "Wait, do you see what's happening here?" And so I've also discovered that it's a journey. And
Yes.
you also write that we prefer a quick fix over a
Yes.
healing journey. And
Mhm.
I we don't really want to be on that healing process because we want it to be over now. We're like a microwave world where we want to put it in the microwave, hit 30 seconds and be done with it.
Yeah.
And I find this to be part of the struggle in my life, is that I'm like, wait, it's been 10 years. Wait, it's been 2 years. Wait,
Mm.
God, I want this to be over. I want the diagnosis. I want the healing. I want it, I want my life back. And then God's like, So can you speak to this truth? Why we prefer a quick fix over a healing journey, and why you say we don't really want to be on this process?
Yeah. I think a lot of us don't want the process because we
Hmm.
don't have an appreciation for it. We just
Oh,
don't
that's good.
understand that the process itself
Hmm.
is part of the healing. And
Yeah.
so, because we don't understand that the process is part of the healing, we just want this
Yeah.
magic, blind man healed immediately kind of miracle. Most of us want that.
Yeah.
And there's so much that God wants to do in the healing process. I look at how we're physically healed and what happens when we have a wound that scabs
Mhm.
over, and then that scab just gets ripped off by something. And
Yes.
so the
Yes.
healing has to start all over
All over
again.
again.
And I
Mhm.
think many of us just go around ripping off our own scabs, because we get in such a rush. We're like, "Ooh, I want this to look like what it looked like before." And so we rip
Mhm.
off the scab, opening up the wound all over again. So, one of the biggest things for me in regards to accepting the
Mhm.
healing process was just understanding that we cannot box God in and put him within
Yeah.
our brain,
Mhm.
our the confines of our human mind
Right.
are too vast for him. And so, like I said before, when we start to spend time in God's
Mhm.
presence, we gain more of his perspective. And when he gives us those glimpses, it can
Mhm.
be enough to heal
Yeah.
small parts of us until we experience that ultimate heavenly healing, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I know that for me, you just get fatigued. And I think fatigue is part of the process of the journey. And when I find myself getting fatigued, it's usually because I have stopped focusing on God. I've stopped focusing on his plan. I've
Mm,
stopped resting, finding ways to rest. And sometimes my desperate prayers actually lead me into a period of rest with him
right.
because of what we talked about, the
Good.
shift of wanting to step into his presence. I also feel like when I get into this, my sister is really good about this because we co-care for my mom. She is boots on the ground. I'm all the way across the United States. But when I start spinning, and because I'm a fix it type person, and I'm also like a pit bull personality where I lock on and then don't want to let go. And there are times where my sister will just say to me when I'm spinning about a decision that needs to be made about my mom, she'll just stop me and she'll go, wait, take a breath. Now let's think about this. And just those few words, stop, take a breath, think about this, it
Mm,
causes me to get out of that cycle. So, one of my favorite quotes from your book, and I keep saying this because there are so many, you should see how dog eared and highlighted your book is now. And I'm telling you, listeners, you need to don't go now while you're listening, but go get a copy of this book. My
mhm.
favorite quote of all the book is praying for God to guide is asking him for directions, while praying for God to show up is asking him for revelations. So let me
Mm.
say that again. Praying for God to guide is asking him for directions, while praying for God to show up is asking for revelation. And I sat and just kind of thought and chewed on that for a long time. So break down your thought process when you were writing that statement.
Yeah, I sat and chewed on it for a long time too. We're talking days. Um, because I kept going back to the fact that so many of us ask God for guidance and
Yes.
we want his direction. We want him to guide us on the path. We want him to explain the way to go. We want him to just move us and show us where we should be going. And so
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be sure to differentiate that when we ask God, show me, instead
Yeah.
of God guide me. Those are two different prayers.
Mm-hmm.
God guiding me is asking him to show me where to go, to lead
Yeah.
me, to help me to follow him. But God show me is asking for revelation. It's
Yeah.
asking, okay, give me a thought,
Yeah.
give me a glimpse,
Mhm.
show me how you're working.
Yeah.
And I always I wanted to have a faith that didn't need God to show me. I think so many of us think that. Like, we're like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm
Mhm.
super Christian. I don't want God to have to show me. I just want him to say, okay, I'm guiding you this way and I'll go that way." But most of us need a sign of
Yeah.
some kind. In the Bible, over and over again, I saw these Old Testament characters who asked God for signs. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what? My daughter asked me last week, she said, "Do you think it's okay to ask God for a sign?" And I just had to chuckle, she hasn't read the book. But I said it absolutely is okay to ask God for a sign. We have examples of people in the Bible who
Yeah.
ask God for signs. And so I believe that they were our examples to know that it's okay
Yeah.
to ask God to show up
Yeah.
and show off in a way that you wouldn't normally do so that
Yeah.
you can see how he's working and what he's doing. I just experienced that right before we got on the show.
Okay.
You talked about the super blooms in the
Yes.
wilderness.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my gosh, Carol has no idea. This past spring, I was in California and I was in the wilderness. I stayed in a home that was, oh, it was a self sufficient home in the wilderness. So everything, it was a mud home, completely self-sufficient home. And I had the privilege of walking in the wilderness. And it was a very early spring. So the blooms were just starting. The buds were out. But we were
Wow.
walking together. My friend and I were walking together in the wilderness through all of this. And she said, I'm so sorry that you're just maybe a week or two early before all the blooms are going to be out. And so I was keeping my eye open, but everything was gray, gray, gray. And we almost got back to the vehicle where we had left it parked. And there was this gorgeous bloom. It was
Oh.
purple. It was
Mhm.
kind of small, but it was out.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh my goodness." So, isn't it cool how God connects the dots between what happened to me in the spring and how I
Yes.
shared about the fact that here's the deal, if I hadn't been walking with my friend, I would have missed those
Yeah.
blooms
Yeah.
because I wasn't looking down. I wasn't looking in the same places that she
Mhm.
was. And it just brings me full circle right back to this conversation. You talked about the super blooms in the wilderness and how you just want to see all of that glory and what God is
Mhm.
doing. I know we want that big revelation. We
Yeah.
want it. We want God to show us. But I think where we mess up is we're looking for the big, grand, glorious
Yes.
super bloom. And God's saying, I brought you a friend and she showed you the purple flower and you didn't even see that. What's it going to
Yes.
take? You know?
That's so beautiful. I love that thing. Oh my gosh, we didn't yeah, so thank you for sharing that because what a beautiful picture. And I think you're right. I think that for me personally, if I had known 10 years ago how this was going to play out, it would have terrified me.
Right.
And there were times where I would felt like I was in the desert for several years and just lost and didn't know what was happening. And then all of a sudden, God starts to reveal his plan and in crazy, amazing ways. And I'm like, oh. So a year ago, September, I'm sitting on a porch in Tennessee, in a mastermind group. And out of that came a website and a podcast. And it took me months to be faithful and do it. I was supposed to launch it and I didn't. And then I did. And so I finally did in February. And then the same weekend this past year, same porch, same chair, different group of women. God brought some things that I'm going to be revealing in the next few months, weeks and months but if I had known it all at that time, it would have been too much. I would have said, no, I can't do this because would have been overwhelmed. And I love that picture of praying for revelation because for me, the revelation is knowing that he has a plan. And I don't
Right.
need to see the whole plan, but I do
Right.
need to know sometimes that he has a plan. And sometimes for me, it's driving down the street and there's something going on that's really causing me distress and I'm desperate and I will just say a short prayer. God, I know you're there, but I can't, I'm scared right now. And very subtly in the background, a song. And it's usually the same song will
Mm,
come on. And I'll go, oh, there it is again. And I cannot tell you how many times this one particular song has come on over the last 10
mm,
years when I've been in distress in the car, because that
right.
seems to be where it happens for me mostly. But it's just that one little sort of smile or hug that God gives me to say, I'm here. I see you,
Yeah.
because the words of the song are saying that.
Right.
And it's like, okay, there's the tangible thing I can grab onto.
Yes.
So each chapter, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's dive deeper into it. Each chapter in your book features a real story of a real person in the Bible who had a real need. And my favorite, I kept going back to this chapter, is chapter 1. I read through them all, and you cover a lot of my favorites, but my favorite one was chapter 1, the cry of distress. God, see me.
Mm.
As a caretaker, I have asked God that more than once. God, do you really see me? Do you know what's happening down here? And you write about one of my favorite characters who's not even like this huge spiritual person, but she's just a person who needed to know that God saw her. And you write about Hagar, and you write Hagar. And I remember this picture so clearly, even now, as I'm thinking back to reading your words, where she's out in the wilderness and she's lost and she doesn't know what to do. And she's run away because she's pregnant and she's going to have a child, and she's a servant, she's a slave. And God tells her to go back. He says to her, Hagar, return. And you write these words, her circumstances didn't change, but her outlook did.
Yeah.
Chills, even now, as I'm saying those words. So how does knowing that God is aware of our circumstances help us change our outlook?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am thinking about a specific time when I was sitting by my daughter's bedside and she was so sick.
Mm.
And many days we got through her illness by taking walks outside. I would
Oh.
pop her in the stroller and we would go outside for a walk as far as I could walk, pushing her or her being
Mm.
comfortable according to the weather and so forth, and then come back in. And this particular day, she was too ill to go for
Mm.
a walk. She couldn't be bundled up in the chair. I couldn't even get her down the steps
Mm.
myself in order for her to be able to go. And I remember it was a gorgeous day, and I'm sitting by her bed and I'm looking out the window, and God and I had a lot of conversations there. And one of them, this particular day, was, Lord, it would be so nice if we could just be outside. I wish we
Mm.
could be outside. And the Holy Spirit said to my heart, you can be wishing that you were outside, or you could be grateful for the sunshine that's coming through the
Oh.
window. And it wasn't an accusatory tone. I knew it
Mm-hmm.
was from the Lord. It was just a gentle reminder, a sweet whisper. And I was like, okay, Lord, I get this.
Yeah.
And I said, in my heart, I am thankful
Yeah.
for the sunshine that's coming through the window. And from then on, instead of looking at the horrible circumstances that we had to go through, and there were
Mm.
so many, in taking
Mhm.
care of someone who's physically ill, what kind of issues you're
Yeah.
dealing with their body just
Mhm. Yeah.
failing in so many ways, and whether that's just
It's
so many ways.
it is a hard job.
Yes. But I started to look for that moment was pivotal for me because I started to look for ways to be thankful and ways that God was showing up. The element of gratitude has so much power.
Mhm.
And so
Yes.
then what that did was it shifted me, and I started praising God for who
Mm.
he is and
Yes.
not caring
I love that.
whether or not the circumstances had changed, but recognizing that he has the ultimate power, the ultimate authority,
Mhm.
that this world, this earth is temporary. And
Yeah.
if we can put on that heavenly perspective, adjust our eyes to see as God sees, then we can experience incredible
Yes.
change in our hearts and lives. So
Mm.
that's where the transformation takes place. That's where the outlook moves and the perspective shifts.
Oh, I love that so much. So you refer to these biblical characters in your book as desperados. And I love that because I'm an old Western. I love old Westerns. And so desperado brings this sort of vision to my mind of a scruffy cowboy on a horse and, in the middle of the desert with no super bloom, lots of cactus and Joshua trees, which is very where very close to where I live, just over the mountains. So, why do you refer to the biblical characters as desperados?
When I look at the prayers of the Bible, the ones that we have that are actually written out and recorded,
Mhm.
I noticed, first of all, that they sounded pretty much like me. God, where are you?
Yeah.
Why aren't you here? And the honesty, the rawness
Yeah.
of their words really captured my heart because I was like, they're not so far from me. Maybe the culture was different. Maybe the circumstances are not mine, but truthfully, the scenarios were the same over and over
Yeah.
again. You've got Hagar dealing with rejection. You've got
Mhm.
Hannah dealing with infertility. You have
Mhm.
David dealing with his own sin
Yeah.
plus the loss of a child.
Mhm.
So many scenarios in the Bible where these desperate characters just had no other way to turn except for looking up. And
Oh,
so when I look at them, I see myself
yeah.
in so many ways of just having nowhere else to turn except for looking up and then recognizing the
Yeah.
craziness of that is that desperation fuels a dependence on God
Mm.
unlike any other.
So good.
And once you have experienced the incredible strength, the
Yeah.
incredible energy, the provision of God personally,
Yeah.
then you don't want to rely
Yes.
on yourself
That's true.
anymore.
That is so
And
true.
so that dependence is fueled by the desperation and it
Mm.
moves us towards God. And I often say that I was afraid that when Taylor died, I would
Mhm.
forget how much I needed the Lord
Mm.
because she kept me tethered to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I really was afraid that I would forget how much I needed God.
Mhm.
And I'm so grateful to tell you that I did not forget.
Amen.
I'm thankful that God has used other circumstances in my life.
Mm.
He's used so many things in His Word and
Mm.
His Spirit and His people to guide me and move me in a direction that keeps me continually relying on Him. And
Yeah.
I don't want to live any other way. I
Mm-mm.
really don't.
I'm with you, girl. I am so with you there. I the morning after I opened up by talking about the morning after I left my husband in a psychiatric hospital and the desperate prayer that I cried out. I mean, if I sit here and I think about it too much, I'll get emotional because,
Right.
I just basically told him, I don't know where he is. I don't know what they're doing to him. I don't even know I don't even know how this is going to play out. I don't even know who to call and who's safe. Who do I call? How do I even deal
Right.
with this?
Right.
And yet, I said to God, I don't want to do this without you.
Right.
I don't want this to happen without you.
Mhm.
So, okay, what are we going to do next?
Right.
How's this?
Right.
What am I supposed to do next? And as we close out our interview today, I was so moved by the very last page of your book. It's called
Mm.
Desperado's Prayer. And so I really want to do something a little bit different. And I want to ask you if as we close out the interview portion, we're gonna do a couple things when we're done. But as we close out this interview portion, will you please read for us out of your book, The Desperado's Prayer?
I would love to. I would love to. Let me open to the right page. A Desperado's Prayer. God, see me in this desperate space. Hold me close, Jesus. I need you. Nothing but your divine hand of healing will mend my brokenness. There is no quick fix, and I need your help. Reassure my doubting mind. Be my protector, especially as I limp. Lord, guide my every thought and prompt me to ask for directions. You are my refuge. Fill my empty soul with your love. Show me how to see you. Show me how to see as you see. I offer this prayer as a sweet reminder that I am your child. Free me that I may praise your name. Let me enter the tower of prayer with listening ears on. Revive me. Breathe in me as only you can, because I trust you in this wilderness. Amen.
Mm. Ooh, okay. Phew. So beautiful. So beautiful. And that
Oh,
is the prayer of my heart. And
mhm.
when I'm a little emotional here. When I read through it as I was finishing your book, I was just sobbing
Yeah.
because you have tapped into a need that we
Yeah.
have as caretakers. So thank you. Okay.
Mm,
So, while I compose myself here, Rachel,
you're
tell us how
good.
the how the listeners can
Aw.
connect with you. This is raw and transparent, no editing. So where can the listeners connect with you?
Thank you for asking. Go to desperateprayers.com
Okay,
and you'll see all of the links there for you to get the book
perfect.
wherever you buy books. But
Mm.
then also, there are a lot of resources there. One of them is a free When You Can't Pray prayer guide.
Ooh,
And that guide is just, if you have no words and you're really struggling, I always tell people borrow the prayers from
amen.
somebody else.
Mm,
And so borrow those prayers in that When You Can't Pray prayer guide. And then there's another resource there as well that's a group discussion guide. If you've got some friends that you're like, man, it would be so much better to do this book together with a couple of gals
yeah.
who I know are struggling and we could use this together, then grab that group discussion guide and it will guide you right through the questions as you walk through the book together.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Rachel. I like to close out every show by asking my guests the same question because I believe as caretakers, we have to take care of ourselves. And more often than not, we ignore or don't pay attention to our own personal needs. And if we don't take care of ourselves, then we cannot efficiently take care of somebody else. So
Right.
I try every day to say, what is one thing or what is one self care activity that I'm going to do for myself today? So, Rachel, I'm going to challenge you right now because when you say it, you have to do it. And you may have already done it. Some of my guests have shared something that they've already done. But, Rachel, what are you going to do in the next 24 hours to take care of yourself?
Oh, wow. So I'm glad that we're asking on this day because I already made the plan.
Oh,
I haven't had a meal with a friend in
oh,
a long time. I can't tell you how long, but it's been a while since it's just been me and a friend. Usually I have my husband, which is
yeah.
really, really awesome. He's my best friend, but he has small group tonight with his men. And so while he's at men's small group, I am going to go have dinner with a friend, and I'm excited.
I love that. I just cracks me up because here's another one of those little God things. As soon as we're done recording here, I am going to go meet a friend, a very sweet friend that she's about 20 years older than I am. She's in her late
Oh,
80s and we're going to go have breakfast together. So that's so
yay.
fun that our care is both the today is both friends. So thank you so much for joining me today, Rachel, and for encouraging all of the caregivers, me and the other caregivers that are listening. I'm going to put all the links into your website in the show notes so that they can connect with you. And you should, you always hear me say this, but you should. And I just want to say as I close that I appreciate each of you who are listening. Our journey as caregivers can be so hard. We can get caught up in so many emotions, fear, exhaustion, anger, impatience. And I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to isolate and feel like I'm all alone. And I want you to know that this Caretaker's Journey podcast and ministry exists to let you know that you are not alone. You're part of 55 million other caregivers in the United States alone. You are loved and you are seen by me, by Rachel, by the Almighty God. And
Yes.
I just think that it's so important for us to know that we are not alone.
Yeah.
So if you would like to know more about my personal caretaking journey, the links to my website, social media, and book will also be in the show notes. My book is called Are You Ready to Find Joy When Life Gets Messy? And boy, do I have a messy life. And those will all be in the show notes. And next week, I will be back for another meaningful conversation about what it looks like to be on the caretaker's journey. And until then, it's all about Him.